The laughter came before the verdict, sharp and careless, slicing through the courtroom like a blade meant for my throat. "She is just a housewife," my stepson scoffed, loud enough for everyone to hear. And in that moment, I realized the past was no longer behind me. It was standing right there, waiting to be unburied. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and paper, a scent that carried authority and judgment. I sat on the hard bench, my palms pressed together so tightly my fingers ached. Across the room, Armin, my husband's son, leaned back with smug confidence, his expensive suit fitting him like armor. He didn't look at me as a woman. He looked at me as furniture, something that had always been there, something invisible. I lowered my eyes not because I was ashamed, but because I was tired. Tired of explaining myself. Tired of being underestimated. Tired of pretending the years I sacrificed didn't matter. The judge entered, his presence commanding silence. He was older now, his hair grayer, his face lined with experience. When his eyes briefly met mine, something flickered there. Recognition. No, that was impossible. I hadn't seen him in over 20 years. But life has a cruel way of looping itself. As the case began, Armin's lawyer spoke smoothly, weaving a narrative that painted me as a manipulative woman trying to steal property that didn't belong to her. According to them, I was merely a housewife. No income, no contribution, no relevance. They spoke as if my life had been lived in silence. My mind drifted backward, to the day I married Farid, Armin's father. I was 32, a widow with a teaching degree I had buried under grief and responsibility. Farid was charming, grieving the loss of his first wife, and desperate for stability. Armin was 17 then, angry, withdrawn, already convinced I was replacing someone irreplaceable. Tried. God knows I tried. I cooked meals he never touched. Attended parent-teacher meetings where he refused to acknowledge me. Paid for his coaching classes quietly from my savings. When Farid lost his job, I sold my gold bangles, wedding gifts, to keep the household running. No one applauded. No one noticed. I became just a housewife, the day I chose peace over pride. But peace is fragile when built on silence. After Farid's sudden death, everything changed. The house felt colder. Armin returned from abroad like a stranger with a mission. He brought lawyers, documents, and accusations. He claimed the house, the accounts, even my dignity. He said I had no legal standing. That I was nothing without his father. And now here we were. "Mrs. Aliyah," the judge said, his voice steady. "Do you wish to respond?" I stood slowly. My knees trembled, but my spine did not. I could feel eyes on me. Curious, judgmental, dismissive. "Yes, Your Honor," I said softly. Armin smirked. I spoke of years. Care. Of contribution that didn't come with receipts. Of being present when it mattered. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I spoke like a woman who had already survived worse than public humiliation. When I finished, the courtroom was quiet. Then Armin laughed again. "With all due respect, Your Honor," he said, standing, "she's exaggerating. She never worked a real job. No assets. No professional record. She's just a housewife." The words echoed. The judge leaned back slightly, studying me. Not with judgment, but with curiosity. His gaze lingered longer than necessary. "Just a housewife," he repeated slowly. Something shifted in his expression. He looked back at Armin. "Young man," he said calmly, "do you know who taught me constitutional law?" The room stilled. Armin frowned. "I know, Your Honor." The judge turned toward me again. His voice suddenly softer. "Mrs. Aliyah Rahman. It's been a long time." My breath caught. "I was a struggling law student," he continued, "when you taught evening classes at the community college. You stayed after hours. You believed in students no one else did. You were my mentor." A murmur spread across the courtroom like wildfire. Armin's face drained of color. I hadn't planned for this. I hadn't even recognized him at first. Time had changed us both. But the truth had a way of standing up when needed. The judge straightened. And I can assure this court, she was never just anything. I felt my chest tighten, not with victory but with something deeper. Vindication mixed with grief. The judge called for a recess. As everyone stood, Armin finally looked at me, not with mockery but with fear. And for the first time in years, I realized this battle wasn't just about property. It was about erasing me. And I was done being erased. The hallway outside the courtroom was colder than inside, the kind of cold that crept into bones. I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders, my heart still pounding from the judge's words. Mentor, a title I had almost forgotten I once carried. Armin's threat echoed in my ears, but I refused to look back at him. Fear had ruled my life for too long. I had learned something over the years. Fear grows when you feed it silence. As I waited on the bench during the recess, memories returned uninvited. I remembered the chalk dust on my fingers, the tired smiles of students attending night classes after factory shifts, the way knowledge once gave me purpose. I had loved teaching. I had loved being seen. When I married Farid, I didn't stop being capable. I just postponed myself. But postponement can quietly turn into erasure. After Farid's death, Armin didn't just want the house. He wanted revenge. For his mother. For the years he believed I had stolen from him. What he never understood was that grief doesn't compete. It multiplies. During the break, Armin's lawyer approached me. His voice was polite, but his eyes were calculating. Mrs. Rahman, perhaps we can settle this outside court, he said. You take a small amount. Avoid further embarrassment. Embarrassment? I smiled faintly. I've already lived through it, I replied. I won't negotiate my existence. His smile faded. When court resumed, the tone shifted. The judge asked questions, direct, precise. He wanted timelines, evidence, intent. And for the first time, Armin struggled to answer. Then came the moment that changed everything. The judge requested financial records, bank statements Farid and I had shared. Armin objected, claiming privacy violations. But the documents were already submitted. As the numbers appeared on the screen, whispers filled the room. Transfers, payments, tuition fees, medical bills, all paid from an account in my name. Can you explain these transactions? The judge asked Armin. He hesitated. I spoke before he could lie. These were for Armin, I said. His overseas education, his startup investment, his legal fees when he got into trouble abroad. Armin snapped his head toward me. Why would you? Because Farid asked me to, I replied calmly. And because I believed you were family. The judge nodded slowly, absorbing the truth. Armin's carefully constructed image began to crack. His confidence wavered. He had built his case on the idea that I was dependent, powerless, replaceable. But paper doesn't lie. Then the judge asked the question Armin had feared most. Did you attempt to transfer ownership of the house before your father's death? Silence. Armin's lawyer stood. Objection. Overruled, the judge said sharply. Armin swallowed. Yes, he admitted. But it was for protection. For whom? The judge asked. Armin didn't answer. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. Not triumph. Sadness. This was the boy I once stayed awake for when he had fevers. The young man I defended in front of his father. The child who never called me mother, but never refused my care either. The betrayal cut deeper than any insult. The judge called for final statements. Armin's lawyer faltered. His words suddenly hollow. When it was my turn, I didn't speak of law. I spoke of dignity. I am not asking for charity, I said. I am asking to be acknowledged. Not as a wife. Not as a housekeeper. But as a human being who gave her life to a family that now wants to erase her. My voice trembled, but it did not break. The judge retired to deliberate. Minutes felt like hours. Armin sat rigid, his jaw clenched. I watched him, wondering when resentment had replaced humanity. Finally, the judge returned. His decision was clear. The house would remain mine. The accounts frozen pending investigation. Armin's attempted transfer ruled fraudulent. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. I exhaled for the first time that day. But before the judge could adjourn, Armin stood abruptly. "This isn't over," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "You may have one here, but you'll regret this." The judge's gavel slammed. "Sit down. Or I will hold you in contempt." Armin glared at me one last time before storming out. As people congratulated me, as the judge nodded warmly in my direction, I felt no celebration, because I knew something others didn't. Armin never lost quietly, and I had just challenged everything he believed he owned. The house echoed with absence. Drawers were overturned, photo frames shattered, cupboards emptied like someone had searched for something desperately, or destroyed things out of spite. I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart thudding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. This wasn't robbery. This was a message. I walked slowly through the living room, stepping over broken glass. My wedding photo with Farid lay face down on the floor. I picked it up, brushed off the dust, and for the first time in years allowed myself to cry. Not because of loss, but because of release. Called the police. Filed a report. Locked the doors. And then I did something I had never done before. I made a decision. The next morning, I visited the community college where I once taught. The building looked smaller than I remembered, but familiar. The dean recognized my name instantly. "We've been trying to reach you for years," she said, surprised. "We could really use someone like you." Smiled. For the first time, my future didn't feel like something stolen. Weeks passed. Armin disappeared from my life, swallowed by investigations and his own bitterness. I focused on rebuilding not the house but myself. I taught again. I mentored young women who believed they were just something, just daughters, just wives, just invisible. I told them the truth. There is no such thing as just. One evening, as I prepared lesson plans, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You think you won. But I lost everything because of you." I stared at the screen, then typed calmly. "No. You lost everything because you believed I was nothing." I blocked the number. Months later, the house was quiet again, but peaceful. Sunlight returned to rooms once filled with tension. I planted new flowers in the garden. Replaced broken frames with new memories. One afternoon a letter arrived. From the court. The investigation was complete. Armin was charged with fraud. His appeals denied. I sat down, breathing deeply. Not out of satisfaction but closure. I was no longer fighting. I was living. Sometimes I still hear his laughter in my dreams. But it no longer controls me. It reminds me how far I've come. Because I was never just a housewife. I was a teacher, mentor, a woman who survived erasure, and chose to be seen. And this time, the world was watching.